Get me another champagne, sweetheart. And try not to spill it this time. The words landed in the ballroom like a crack across polished glass. Conversation slowed. A few heads turned. A few smiles appeared. And one woman stood perfectly still. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Carter. It was 7:18 p.m. inside the Grand Meridian Ballroom in Midtown Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen stars. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays filled with champagne flutes. The annual Whitmore Capital Investor Gala was supposed to celebrate one of the largest business partnerships of the year, a $2.7 billion joint venture between two corporate giants. The room was filled with hedge fund managers, tech founders, private equity executives, and the kind of families whose last names appeared on university buildings and hospital wings. Near the center of the ballroom stood Naomi Carter, 43 years old, black, composed, dressed in a simple black evening gown with no designer logos and no jewelry beyond a small silver watch. She looked elegant, but understated, deliberately so. Her hands rested calmly at her sides as she listened to a conversation near one of the cocktail tables. Then came the voice. Madison Whitmore, 28, blonde, wealthy, confident in the way only someone raised around private jets and inherited power could be. She stepped forward holding an empty champagne flute between two fingers. Her smile was sharp enough to cut through the room. Sweetheart, she repeated. I asked for another drink. A ripple of laughter moved through the small circle around her. Not loud, just enough. Just enough to let everyone know where they thought Naomi belonged. Naomi looked at the glass. Then she looked at Madison. Her expression never changed. I don't work here, she said quietly. Madison blinked once before laughing. Really? Because you certainly don't look like an investor. More. Laughter followed. A venture capitalist standing beside Madison smirked into his drink. Another guest shook his head and smiled. The air in that corner of the ballroom changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough for people nearby to stop pretending they weren't listening. Naomi didn't move. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply watched Madison the way someone watches a storm gathering on the horizon. Then who exactly are you? Madison asked. The question hung there, waiting. Naomi could have answered. She could have ended the entire conversation with a single sentence. Instead, she remained silent. Across the room, a young event coordinator named Olivia Grant looked up from her tablet. Her eyes landed on Naomi, then widened slightly. Recognition flashed across her face before disappearing just as quickly. At the far end of the ballroom, giant LED screens displayed the logo of the new joint venture. Billions of dollars. Years of negotiations. Hundreds of executives. Everything tonight was supposed to celebrate a partnership built on trust. Yet standing beneath those glowing screens, Madison Whitmore had just mistaken one of the most powerful women in the room for hired help. And the worst part wasn't the insult. It was the confidence behind it. The certainty. The belief that wealth had a look. That power had a color. That belonging could be judged in a single glance. Madison raised an eyebrow. Well, she asked, are you going to answer me? Naomi finally smiled. It wasn't an angry smile. It wasn't even a warning. It was the smile of someone who already knew exactly how this night would end. And somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, forces much larger than anyone in that room could imagine were already beginning to move. Madison Whitmore waited for a reaction. She expected embarrassment. She expected an apology. She expected the woman standing in front of her to shrink beneath the weight of public judgment. Instead, Naomi Carter simply held her gaze. The silence unsettled Madison more than any argument could have. Around them, the ballroom continued to sparkle beneath layers of gold light and crystal reflections. Waiters moved between tables. Investors discussed markets and acquisitions. A jazz trio replaced the string quartet near the stage. Yet in that small corner of the room, attention had quietly shifted. People were watching now. Naomi glanced toward the massive LED screens hanging above the ballroom floor. The logos rotated slowly across the display. Whitmore Capital, Carter Logistics Technologies. Together, they represented one of the most anticipated business partnerships in the country. Analysts had spent months discussing the deal. Financial news outlets called it transformative. Industry leaders called it historic. Tonight was supposed to celebrate the future. Madison followed Naomi's eyes and laughed softly. "You seem very interested in that partnership," she said. "Let me guess. You read about it online." Several people nearby chuckled. Naomi remained calm. "Something like that," she replied. Madison folded her arms. "You know, these events are private. Invitation only. Most people here have spent decades building companies." Her tone carried the confidence of someone who had never been forced to prove she belonged. Naomi nodded once. "I am aware. Then you understand why people are confused." Madison smiled again. "Nobody seems to know who you are." The words floated through the air. Naomi had heard variations of them for most of her life. Not because she lacked accomplishments. Not because she lacked credentials. Because people often struggled to connect power with someone who looked like her. Across the ballroom, Olivia Grant stared at her tablet. Her pulse quickened. She checked the guest list again. Then a second time. There was no mistake. Naomi Carter was not simply invited to the gala. She was listed among the evening's principal stakeholders. Olivia looked toward the stage, then back toward Naomi. Something was very wrong. Meanwhile, Madison continued enjoying the attention. "Are you somebody's assistant?" she asked. "Public relations, maybe?" Another investor standing nearby added, "Perhaps she is with catering management." More laughter followed. Naomi listened without responding. She had learned years ago that some people revealed everything about themselves when allowed to keep talking. Near the entrance, a pair of executives arrived and paused as they spotted Naomi. One of them appeared ready to approach her, but was intercepted by another conversation before he could cross the room. The moment passed unnoticed by everyone except Olivia. The young coordinator took a step forward. Then another. She wanted to say something. She wanted to correct the mistake unfolding in front of hundreds of guests. Yet hesitation held her back. Madison suddenly lifted her champagne flute again. "Since you are standing there doing nothing," she said, "perhaps you can at least tell us your name." The room seemed quieter now. Not silent, just charged. Naomi looked around slowly. She saw curious faces, skeptical faces, amused faces, people who had already decided exactly who she was. Then she smiled politely. "My name is Naomi Carter." The reaction was immediate and underwhelming. Most people did not recognize the name. Madison certainly did not. "Wonderful," Madison replied. "And I am sure that means something somewhere." More laughter spread through the circle. But several feet away, Olivia Grant froze completely, because she knew exactly what that name meant. And for the first time all evening, she realized the people laughing were standing on the edge of a disaster they could not yet see. Olivia Grant felt her stomach drop. The tablet in her hands suddenly seemed 10 pounds heavier. She looked from the screen to Naomi Carter and back again. There was no possibility of confusion. No duplicate entry. No clerical error. The name standing in front of Madison Whitmore belonged to the very person whose company had supplied the technology, infrastructure, and operational backbone that made the entire joint venture possible. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Across the ballroom, Madison was enjoying herself too much to notice the shift happening around her. "You know," she said, swirling the last sip of champagne in her glass, "it is actually impressive. Most people would have left by now." Several members of her social circle laughed. One young investor adjusted his cufflinks and smiled. "She probably wants a photo for social media," another added. "Maybe she thinks networking works by standing near successful people." More laughter. Naomi listened quietly. The room no longer felt warm. The laughter had changed something. It was not friendly. It was not harmless. It had become a performance, a demonstration of who belonged and who supposedly did not. Naomi had seen it before. Different city, different faces, same script. Madison tilted her head. "So tell us, Naomi, what exactly do you do?" Naomi answered calmly. "I build companies." Madison grinned. "Everybody says that in New York." The group laughed again. Near the edge of the gathering, a few guests began exchanging uncertain glances. Something about Naomi's composure felt unusual. Most people placed in this situation would have become defensive. Some would have argued. Others would have walked away. Naomi did neither. She stood there with the patience of someone waiting for a clock to reach a predetermined hour. At the entrance to the ballroom, 2 security personnel quietly received a message from an event supervisor. Neither moved immediately, but both turned their attention toward Naomi's section of the room. Madison noticed. Her smile widened. "See," she said. "Even security is wondering what is going on." One of her friends chuckled. "This is becoming awkward." "For her," Madison replied. Olivia finally started walking toward the group. Every step felt faster than the last. She needed to stop this. She needed to explain. Yet before she could reach them, a senior event manager intercepted her. "Olivia," he whispered, "what are you doing?" She lowered her voice. "There is a mistake." "What mistake?" "A very serious one." Before she could explain further, applause suddenly erupted near the stage as another speaker was announced. The distraction delayed her. Precious seconds slipped away. Back near the cocktail tables, Madison leaned closer to Naomi. "Let me guess," she said. "You are hoping somebody important recognizes you." Naomi met her eyes. "Eventually." The answer drew another round of laughter. But not from everyone. Several nearby guests remained silent now. They were beginning to sense an imbalance. Not because they knew who Naomi was. Because they could see who Madison was becoming. Confidence had turned into arrogance. Amusement had turned into humiliation. And the entire ballroom was slowly becoming an audience. One of the security officers started moving toward them. Olivia saw it happen. Her pulse jumped. She quickened her pace. Across the room, giant screens continued displaying images celebrating partnership, trust, and shared leadership. Beneath those glowing promises, the exact opposite was unfolding. And with every passing minute, the cost of that mistake was growing larger than anyone in the room could imagine. Olivia Grant finally reached the edge of the gathering just as the security officer approached. Her heart was pounding, not because she feared confrontation, but because she understood exactly how catastrophic this situation had become. "Excuse me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There has been a misunderstanding." Madison Whitmore glanced at her with visible annoyance. "There is no misunderstanding." Olivia ignored the comment and looked directly at the security officer. "She belongs here." The officer paused. "Ma'am, we received a concern regarding guest credentials." "Then whoever raised the concern is wrong," Olivia replied. The confidence in her voice surprised even her. For the first time that evening, a crack appeared in Madison's smile. "And how exactly would you know that?" Olivia lifted the tablet in her hands. "Because I checked." Madison laughed dismissively. "Checked what?" Olivia took a breath. Every instinct told her to be careful. Yet another instinct, stronger and harder to ignore, told her that silence would make her part of the problem. The guest registry. The surrounding conversations faded. People nearby began listening openly now. Madison folded her arms. "And?" Olivia looked at Naomi before answering. Naomi remained perfectly calm, offering neither encouragement nor warning. "And her credentials are valid." A murmur moved through the group. Madison's expression hardened. "That proves nothing." Olivia continued. "She is not a gate crasher. She is not somebody's assistant. She is not with catering." The words landed heavily. One investor shifted uncomfortably. Another lowered his drink. The security officer glanced between them. "Then who is she?" Madison asked. The question came out sharper than she intended. Olivia hesitated. Something about Naomi's expression told her not to reveal everything. "Not yet. I think you should speak to senior management before making any more assumptions," Olivia said carefully. Madison rolled her eyes. People like her always have someone ready with an excuse. The sentence hung in the air. Several guests looked away. Others stared into their glasses. Even those who had laughed earlier seemed less comfortable now. Naomi remained silent. That silence was becoming impossible to ignore. It was not the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of control. Madison noticed the shifting mood and doubled down. "Let me guess," she said. "Now we are supposed to pretend she is important." Olivia's face tightened. "I am not pretending anything." "Then say it," Madison challenged. "Tell everyone why she is here." The ballroom seemed smaller suddenly. The lights felt brighter. Somewhere near the stage, another speaker began addressing the crowd, but almost nobody in this corner of the room was paying attention anymore. Olivia looked around. Dozens of eyes were fixed on her. Then she looked back at Naomi. Naomi gave the slightest nod. Not permission, not instruction, just acknowledgement. Olivia swallowed. "I cannot discuss confidential guest information," she said. Madison laughed again, but the laughter sounded thinner this time. Less certain. Convenient. Yet the damage had already begun. The security officer stepped back slightly. His posture changed. The certainty that had brought him across the ballroom was gone. Nearby guests exchanged increasingly uneasy glances. They did not know who Naomi Carter was, but they were beginning to suspect she was not who Madison believed. And in that realization, the balance of the room shifted for the first time. Madison could still feel the attention on her. She could still hear scattered laughter. But beneath it was something new. Doubt. The kind that spreads quietly through a crowd before turning into something much larger. And standing at the center of it all, Naomi Carter simply smiled and checked the time on her silver watch as though she already knew exactly what would happen next. Naomi lowered her wrist after checking the time. 7:26. Barely 8 minutes had passed since Madison Whitmore first handed her the empty champagne glass. Yet the atmosphere inside the ballroom felt completely different now. The laughter that had once come so easily was fading. Uncertainty had entered the room, and uncertainty has a way of exposing people. Madison sensed it. She could feel attention slipping away from her control. The confidence that had fueled her performance was beginning to meet resistance. "This is ridiculous," she said, looking around at the gathering crowd. "We are standing here acting like this is some kind of mystery." Nobody responded immediately. That silence bothered her. "If she belongs here," Madison continued, "then she should prove it." A few people nodded. Others remained expressionless. Olivia Grant stepped forward again. "She does not owe anyone proof." Madison turned sharply toward her. "You are an event coordinator." "That is correct." "Then coordinate the event and stop interfering." Olivia held her ground. "What is happening here is already interfering with the event." The exchange drew even more attention. Guests who had been standing several feet away slowly drifted closer. The ballroom floor seemed to contract around the growing circle. Naomi remained calm, watching, listening, waiting. Then Madison made a mistake. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it crossed a line. "People spend their entire lives trying to get into rooms like this," she said. "Sometimes they convince themselves they belong when they do not." The words landed heavily. Several faces tightened. A middle-aged executive standing nearby lowered his gaze. Another guest shifted uncomfortably. The sentence carried more than arrogance. It carried judgment. Naomi heard it, and, for a brief moment, another room appeared in her memory. She was 18 years old again. Charlotte, North Carolina. A private country club hosting a scholarship banquet. She remembered the polished floors, the expensive suits, the uncomfortable smiles. She remembered arriving early in a simple department store dress because it was all her family could afford. She remembered a staff member approaching her before the event began. "The service entrance is around back." She had explained she was a guest. The woman had smiled politely and repeated herself. "Service entrance." Naomi remembered standing outside afterward, staring through the glass doors while other students entered freely. She remembered promising herself something that night. One day, nobody would decide her value before hearing her name. The memory faded. The ballroom returned. Madison was still speaking, still digging deeper without realizing it. "Honestly," Madison said, "security should probably escort her somewhere more appropriate before this becomes embarrassing." The words finally triggered a response. Not from Naomi. From the crowd. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Guests exchanged looks. Even the security officer appeared uncomfortable now. He glanced toward Naomi, then toward Olivia, then away entirely. The certainty was gone. Olivia stepped forward again. "Enough." Madison laughed. "Enough." "Yes." Olivia's voice was stronger than before. "Enough assumptions. Enough disrespect." Madison folded her arms. "You are risking your job over someone you do not even know." Olivia looked directly at Naomi, then back at Madison. "That is where you are wrong." Madison's expression hardened. "Then tell everyone who she is." Olivia hesitated. The room waited. Naomi remained silent. Her silver watch reflected the ballroom lights as she slowly reached into her evening bag and removed her phone. She glanced at the screen. A single message had appeared. The sender was Tiana Brooks, her executive assistant. The message contained only 3 words. "Ready when you are." Naomi's expression never changed. But for the first time all evening, she smiled. The smile unsettled Olivia almost as much as it unsettled Madison. It was calm, measured, certain. The kind of smile people wear when the outcome has already been decided. Naomi looked at the message one final time before locking her phone and slipping it back into her evening bag. Madison noticed the movement. "What is so funny?" she asked. Naomi looked at her. "Nothing." "Then why are you smiling?" "Because some lessons arrive exactly when they are needed." Madison shook her head. "You really enjoy speaking in riddles." Around them, the crowd continued to grow. Guests who had intended to spend the evening discussing investments and market forecasts were now openly watching the confrontation. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a countdown. Near the stage, executives from both companies continued greeting guests, unaware that a storm was quietly forming beneath their own event banners. Olivia's phone suddenly vibrated. She glanced down. A corporate notification flashed across her screen. Then another. Her eyes widened. Across the ballroom, several other phones began lighting up almost simultaneously. One executive frowned at his device. Another stopped mid-conversation. A third immediately stepped away from his table and began making a call. The change spread through the room like a ripple moving across still water. Madison noticed it. "What is happening?" Nobody answered her. Naomi calmly removed her phone again and tapped a single contact. The call connected almost instantly. "Good evening, Naomi," said a professional female voice. It was Tiana Brooks. "Everything is prepared." Naomi nodded. "Activate Protocol 27. Olivia heard the words clearly. So did several nearby guests. None of them understood what they meant. Madison laughed. "Protocol 27? What is that supposed to be?" Naomi ignored the question. "Have the board review all pending authorizations," she said. "Understood," Tiana replied. "The review process is already underway. Funding transfers have been paused pending executive confirmation." Several people standing nearby looked up immediately. One hedge fund manager nearly dropped his drink. Another executive checked his phone again with growing concern. Madison's smile began to fade. "What funding transfers?" she asked. Naomi ended the call without answering. Across the ballroom, more phones vibrated. More executives stepped away from conversations. The atmosphere shifted again. This time it was not social. It was financial. The kind of shift that people in boardrooms recognize instantly. A senior vice president from Whitmore Capital hurried past the crowd with a worried expression. Another executive from Carter Logistics Technologies appeared near the entrance, speaking urgently into a headset. Olivia watched it happen in real time. The event was beginning to bend around Naomi's decision. Madison looked around uneasily. "Can somebody explain what is going on?" she demanded. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody smiled. One investor slowly lowered his phone and stared at Naomi. "The joint venture review process," he whispered. It was just frozen. The words landed like a weight in the center of the crowd. Madison blinked. "That is impossible." "No," the investor replied quietly. "It is not." Naomi stood motionless beneath the ballroom lights. Her expression remained composed. Around her, conversations were dissolving into confusion. Questions replaced laughter. Concern replaced certainty. Somewhere behind the scenes, conference calls were already beginning. Lawyers were being contacted. Executives were requesting updates. And all because of a single instruction delivered through a phone call lasting less than 30 seconds. Madison looked directly at Naomi now. For the first time all evening, there was no amusement in her eyes. Only uncertainty. Naomi met her gaze and spoke softly enough that only the closest people could hear. "You spent the evening deciding who belonged in this room." She paused. Now the room is about to learn who decides what happens inside it. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music still drifting from the stage. Nobody seemed interested in the gala anymore. Phones remained in people's hands. Eyes remained fixed on Naomi Carter. The ballroom had become a courtroom, and every person present suddenly realized they might have witnessed the opening moments of something far larger than a social embarrassment. Madison Whitmore looked around, searching for someone to restore order. Someone to explain why executives were leaving conversations. Why messages kept arriving. Why senior leaders suddenly appeared concerned. Then a new notification flashed across the giant screens suspended above the ballroom. At first it looked routine. A corporate update. A scheduling adjustment. But within seconds the display changed. The logo of the joint venture faded. A new slide appeared. Several guests gasped. Others immediately stepped closer. At the center of the screen was a photograph. Beneath it appeared a name. Naomi Carter. Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Carter Logistics Technologies. Co-architect of the Whitmore Strategic Partnership Initiative. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Madison stared upward as if the screen had betrayed her personally. The color drained from her face. Around her, investors who had laughed minutes earlier suddenly looked anywhere except at Naomi. The realization spread through the ballroom in waves. First confusion, then recognition, then disbelief. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. The truth was finally impossible to ignore. One of the executives standing near the stage whispered, "My God." Another shook his head slowly. "That is Naomi Carter." A third executive laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because he could not believe what he was seeing. Madison looked back at Naomi. No, the word escaped her lips almost automatically. That cannot be right. Naomi met her gaze calmly. Why not? Madison opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Every answer she might have given sounded worse than silence. Naomi took a slow step forward. The crowd parted without realizing it. "You asked who I was." Her voice was not loud, yet every person nearby heard it clearly. "You mocked me at a celebration funded in large part by my company." Nobody interrupted. "You questioned whether I belonged in this room." Another step. "You assumed status based on appearance." Another. "And you never once stopped to ask why my name was already on every major document connected to tonight's event." Madison looked down. The confidence that had carried her through the evening was gone. Naomi continued. "You spent 15 minutes deciding who mattered." Her voice remained calm, controlled, precise. "That was your mistake." Across the ballroom, executives from both companies were now receiving additional updates. Some looked shocked. Others looked alarmed. The implications were becoming clear. This was no longer a social problem. It was a business crisis. Naomi glanced briefly at the screens before returning her attention to Madison. "You call me unimportant." The room seemed to hold its breath. "Yet the partnership you came here to celebrate cannot move forward without my approval." Complete silence followed. No laughter. No whispers. No excuses. Only the sound of hundreds of people confronting the consequences of assumptions they had witnessed unfold in real time. And standing beneath the lights, Naomi Carter finally stopped smiling. Because the reveal was over. Now came the consequences. The consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. Within minutes, the ballroom transformed from a celebration into a crisis center. Executives stepped away from cocktail tables and gathered in urgent clusters. Phones remained pressed against ears. Messages flashed across screens. Conversations that had begun with confidence now ended with concern. Madison Whitmore stood frozen beneath the glow of the giant displays. The room that had laughed with her was no longer standing beside her. People were creating distance. Quietly, carefully. The same investors who had joined her jokes moments earlier suddenly became fascinated by their phones. Across the ballroom, a familiar figure appeared near the main entrance. William Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Capital, billionaire, industry icon, Madison's father. He moved quickly through the crowd with two senior executives at his side. The expression on his face told everyone something was very wrong. William rarely looked rattled. Tonight, he looked like a man who had just received news capable of changing everything. He stopped several feet from Naomi and immediately looked toward Madison. "What happened?" he asked. No one answered. Madison swallowed. "Dad, this is being blown out of proportion." William's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" The question came again, harder this time. Olivia looked away. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, one executive stepped forward. "Sir, there was an incident involving Ms. Carter." William turned toward Naomi. Recognition flashed instantly across his face. Unlike his daughter, he knew exactly who she was. And the moment he connected the situation, the color drained from his face. "Naomi," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Naomi remained calm. "We have been talking all evening. Your daughter simply did not realize it." The words landed with surgical precision. William looked toward Madison again. This time the silence between father and daughter said more than any argument could. Around them, additional notifications continued arriving. Several members of Whitmore Capital's leadership team were now openly discussing emergency contingency plans. The board review initiated by Protocol 27 was expanding. Funding authorizations remained frozen. Pending transfers remained suspended. The partnership that everyone had gathered to celebrate was effectively paused. One analyst near the back of the room whispered to another executive, "If Carter Logistics pulls out completely, the valuation impact could be enormous." Another replied, billions. The word traveled through the room like a cold wind. Billions. Madison heard it. So did everyone else. For the first time all evening, she seemed to understand the scale of what had happened. This was no longer about embarrassment. It was about consequences measured in board meetings, investor confidence, and long-term partnerships. William took a slow breath. Naomi, I apologize. The ballroom became silent again. A billionaire apologizing publicly was not something people witnessed often. Naomi listened carefully. William continued. This should never have happened. Naomi nodded once. You are right. The simplicity of the response somehow made it heavier. Nearby guests watched in complete silence. Nobody wanted to miss a single word. William glanced toward the giant screens displaying partnership materials that now felt almost ironic. Trust, leadership, shared vision. The slogans suddenly seemed hollow. Naomi looked around the ballroom, at the investors, at the executives, at the guests, who had witnessed everything. Then she spoke calmly. The problem was never one comment. Her gaze settled briefly on Madison. The problem was the culture that made the comment feel acceptable. And as those words settled over the room, everyone realized the real collapse had already happened long before any financial decision was finalized. The ballroom remained quiet long after Naomi finished speaking. Her words lingered in the air like a final verdict. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one attempted another joke. Even the music seemed distant now, reduced to a faint background sound beneath the weight of realization. William Whitmore stood motionless for several seconds before slowly lowering his gaze. Around him, executives continued reviewing reports, notifications, and projections. The numbers were clear. The consequences were real. Yet Naomi was not watching the financial calculations. She was watching the people. Because the story had never truly been about money. It had never been about a partnership agreement or a valuation model. It had been about something much simpler. Respect. Madison looked smaller than she had earlier that evening. The confidence that once filled every sentence had disappeared. She glanced around the room, searching for support, but found none. The crowd that had laughed beside her now avoided eye contact. The room had turned. Not because Naomi demanded it. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. Olivia Grant stood nearby, still holding the tablet that had started everything. Naomi noticed her and smiled warmly. Thank you, she said. Olivia blinked. For what? For speaking when it would have been easier not to. Olivia looked down briefly. I almost stayed quiet. Naomi nodded. Most people do. The answer carried no judgment. Only honesty. Nearby, several guests exchanged thoughtful looks. Some seemed embarrassed. Others reflective. A few appeared genuinely changed. William finally stepped forward again. Whatever happens next, he said carefully, I hope this can become a lesson. Naomi considered the statement. Then she nodded once. That depends on whether people learn from it. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Less tense. More honest. Across the ballroom, the giant screens slowly faded from promotional material to a simple, closing message thanking guests for attending. The celebration everyone expected had never happened. Something more important had. Naomi glanced at her phone. A new message from Tiano appeared. Board review complete. Awaiting final recommendation. Naomi read it and smiled. Then she locked the screen and slipped the phone away. She had already made her point. The room no longer needed another demonstration of power. As guests began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave, conversations changed. They were no longer discussing market trends or investment strategies. They were discussing assumptions, leadership, character, the things that do not appear on balance sheets but shape every decision people make. Naomi picked up her evening bag and started toward the exit. The crowd naturally parted. Not out of fear, out of respect. Halfway to the door, she stopped. Not for applause, not for recognition. Simply because she wanted to leave them with one final thought. She turned back toward the room. Hundreds of eyes followed her. People often mistake access for worth, she said calmly. They assume power has a certain face, a certain background, a certain appearance. The ballroom became completely silent. Naomi continued. But the moment you decide someone belongs beneath you, you stop seeing who they really are. No one moved. No one looked away. I did not pause a partnership because of one insult, she said. I paused it because the insult revealed something deeper. Her gaze moved across the room one final time. Character always shows itself eventually. Tonight it simply arrived early. Then she smiled, turned, and walked toward the doors. The ballroom remained silent long after she was gone. And for many people in that room, the most valuable lesson of the evening was not measured in billions of dollars. It was measured in the cost of judging a person before learning